Welcome to our Emmy Composers panel. We have with us Carter Burwell from Space Force, Colin Stetson from Barkskins, Curtis Moore from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Dave Porter from Better Call Saul and El Camino, and Siddhartha Khosla from This Is Us. Thank you guys for joining us. Well, music is such an important and memorable part of shows and movies, but they're often one of the last components before like a show or a picture is locked. So what are the pros and cons from your perspective of that, of coming in pretty late in the game for a show?
I've been very fortunate in most of the projects that I've worked on in the Vince Gilligan universe that I'm not getting started until the picture is nearly locked. And we also, I was very fortunate enough very early on to instill in them that temp music is evil. And so I've avoided that. I've avoided that all these years, which is an absolute blessing. But, I think for me, I love being late to the process. I do read scripts from time to time, or look at early cuts when I need to. But most of the time I end up envisioning things different than they end up being anyways. And so it's not of much use to me. I take my cues from what's been created and all the important creative decisions that get made before I get involved. How it's written, how it's shot, how it's acted, maybe most importantly of all, the pacing of how it's cut, how it's edited. All those things have a big impact on me, I think, in how I start to go about composing for a scene. And so for me personally, I like being late to the game.
Yeah, I'll say one thing. I mean, I agree with everything that they've said. One, perhaps downside is that you are also the last resort to solve any problems that exist. And so you're often called upon to do that. But, that's the job.
That is, yeah, I've dealt with that quite a lot.
That's interesting because I think we all can agree that temp music is evil. And it's interesting because what I try to do is on the Dan Fogelman projects that I've worked on, and with other, and I think Dan I learned with Dan, and I've tried to apply that elsewhere. I on the other hand like to get involved really early, and I think it's because I am I'm definitely less experienced than the rest of you. You guys have a way better, more impressive resume than I do, and for me, it's more that there's an insecurity that I have about the temp music that makes me want to get in really early to avoid anyone getting attached to any temp. And so with This Is Us, I find myself early on, now not as much now, but I was pre-writing themes for things I knew were coming up, and in hoping that editors would cut with that piece of music and not cut with temp. And so for me, it comes out of an insecurity about the temp, where I am just doing whatever I can to get in early.
Well, the strength I agree, and my process is absolutely the same. Early on, I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Johan Johansson and work with him quite a bit. And I think I was actually our first lunch together. He described to me how it was, and I think I was probably railing against temp having this very same conversation that we're having now. And he was saying, I don't use it, and I refuse to use it, and so I write all of my music. I write the temp music for the well in advance of the edit, and so I just started asking every job I got. I just started asking, can we start this early? Can we get out ahead of it? Can the temp be all the music that I write off of the script and for this specifically? So then the temp love that invariably will happen in that edit when the director, editor, producers, when they've seen it, just hundreds, thousands of hours, it's all love to the music that you've written specifically for it, and so use that to your advantage. And so I love a long runway.
The one challenge there is that you can hate your own temp too. That's not how it's.
I try to avoid it.
gosh, that's so funny. And of course, on my side of things, I'm the opposite of what you guys have been doing. We had to have our songs done before anything shot, before anything happened. We had, sort of, temporary final mixes of everything. And then in my case, I actually didn't even see some of the final edits until it aired. So my process and this particular thing was the exact opposite. We sort of finished everything before they started shooting.
I love it every time I've talked to a composer, they just rail against temp music. So I loved it. So what was like your worst case of temp music that just maybe derailed you, where you just had to like fight against it?
You mean in my whole career or on this show?
In your whole career.
Oh my gosh. Well, my worst case was I did a film called Three Kings with David O. Russell, and we talked about it before he shot it. And I thought, I think he's a fantastic director. And we talked about all the possibilities that we could have with this show, which takes place during the first Gulf War. And then when we got to the recording, they'd already been testing the movie with temp. They'd been doing market testing, which is, that's certainly part of the film business. I don't know. It's not as common perhaps in television. So they have to have temp music in there to show it to an audience, even as they're still editing the film. And you're right. If you get in there really early enough, you can try to get them to use your sketches or something, but I wasn't in quite that early. And when we got to the recording stage, David, he was getting such good scores from his market screenings that he didn't want to change anything. He was like, everything that I wrote that he had loved, he decided, no, it should all be like the temp. And he would be even like, he'd take me and listen to the temp in the middle of the recording. He'd say, no, your music goes dum, da, dum. And the temp goes da, dum, da, dum. It was really just a nightmare. And, those things happen, but I was so looking forward to working with a director where I thought I'd be a super open mind and ready for anything. And it ended up being the opposite. A variety of factors there, but that was my worst.
And just tongue in cheek, because I adore him, but it's anytime you have to replace Max Richter, because invariably it's going to be perfect. It's going to say everything that the directors and the producers wanted to say, and then you're going to come in there and try it from every different angle, and nothing is going to work.
I do wonder. I mean, I've found in like the last few years of television, at least, that because of just how elevated television has become, we're in this golden age of television. I have found more often than not, producers right away in my early conversations, I always ask. I said, "Hey, do you mind if we don't put any temp in?" And I just write off the script and I give you some ideas as you're shooting or before you're shooting. And they invariably love that. And I think because everyone feels like the second, a composer starts doing that, they're going to get something. And we all know the benefit of no temp is that you'll get something original and something that feels new and fresh and unlike anything you've heard before. And so that's my experience recently has been more and more television producers are really into this idea of abandoning the temp altogether, unless it's your own.
I think I've only done 2 TV shows, but I think that the more interesting that the show is, the less it's possible to temp it. And that's not about us. But that's about our choices in the shows we do. And I think it's what Siddhartha is saying. If you're choosing interesting work with interesting creators, they're going to be more open to that because you can't find pre-existing music that's necessarily going to work.
And thank goodness for that, because let's hope it keeps us all employed.
Yeah.
Do you have a worse temp experience, or?
I don't know if you call it a temp experience, but I had a curious experience in this world. A few years ago, I was fortunate to work on a film called The Disaster Artist. Which was about a film called The Room, which is, one would say it has been said is the worst film made of all time. And when I got involved in working on that movie, there was some of the music from The Room in the film. And so it became a curious way of me having to distinguish myself from this music, which maybe isn't the greatest produced thing ever, and still try to capture the essence of that in a more produced movie, if you know what I mean. It became a very curious.
It's like Inception.
Dilemma. So. Yes, exactly.
Curtis, do you have a case like that? You're a little different from a songwriting.
But it is. I did a score once for it's kind of one of those big Cirque du Soleil type things, and it was actually in China. And I remember flying over there for the end of the tech period. They've been rehearsing for months. And I walked out into the huge amphitheater space, and they had one of those Bellagio fountains. This was in Shenzhen, and it was playing to a score of one of the pieces from the show that I'd written. So here I walk out with my luggage, and I'm hearing my song play, and it's the big finale. It's kind of great. But then I realized that they are using my temp track, not the final track. So my voices start coming out. We'd rehearsed with all these professional singers come in. This is my demo that they're playing. So that was my worst. So it was my own temp music that I was like, oh no! It was a very shocking, funny moment.
Like, I hate myself. I can't.
Why are you playing me? Nobody wants to hear that.
So what are some of your favorite scores or even like theme songs from TV shows? Colin, let's start with you.
My friend Ben Frost has worked on Dark. I've been really adoring that lately. I'm a huge fan of Dave's. What you've been doing on Better Call Saul has been. I remember watching the first episode of that, and the intro and outro is just, you nailed it so absolutely. And the tone, like as you talked about, the shift of tone from the Breaking Bad days, I thought was brilliant. So yeah.
Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you.
No.
For me, it's probably Angela Badalamenti's score from Twin Peaks. I love that.
Here.
And yeah, I agree. Dave is also. I'm a big fan of Dave. I mean, everyone here is. I'm in awe of all of you, but I'm a big fan of. I love Dave's work from Breaking Bad a lot. Just as under the skin, That's cool.
I mean, I could jump in. I'm going to do a totally weird Neil scratch just because I'm talking about songwriting, but I have to go back. I loved The Muppet Show. Do you guys remember The Muppet Show? And I thought they just had the most amazing team of musicians working on that show to bring in such great variety acts. And, one of my favorites was Bernadette Peters. She sang this tune that was just, If Just One Person Believes in You. It was just so sweet. I mean, I was very young when I was watching it, but even going back now, you watch how well the music is integrated into that. I just loved The Muppet Show.
Dave, what about you? You can't pick yourself, unfortunately. So
No, nor would I ever, for sure. I grew up in an era of not great TV that we have now. So there weren't so many standouts. But I was definitely that kid that stayed home on Friday nights as a teenager and watched Miami Vice. And there was a simplicity, but a power, and most importantly of all, a heavy-handed mix to how the score was presented in that show. I feel like I certainly I watched a lot of films, and my father continues to be a big audiophile, so we love to watch movies real loud, but I feel like Miami Vice for some reason was that. And Twin Peaks too, but even earlier, Miami Vice was that first show that I watched that where music made a difference on TV, whereas it always did in film.
You got to do like the Miami Vice reboot after Better Call Saul. All right, guys. Well, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and stay safe, wear your masks, and we'll see you hopefully in person one day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Very best wishes to all of you.
See you all.
Thank you.